Good evening, and welcome to another year of Hello, It's Us. Hello, It's Us is a program which is dedicated to educating our viewers about issues that are important to people with disabilities, and in the process, we believe that you will learn that these very same issues are important to individuals across the board. Hello, It's Us is a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop, and our friends here at Public Access Television. My name is Mike Honig, and I will serve as one of your hosts for Hello, It's Us during 2016, and we'll share a little bit more about myself shortly. But at this point, I would like to introduce my longtime friend and co-host, Keith Ruff.
Thank you, Mike. And it's a pleasure working with you and starting the show again. No one will ever quite replace Terry, but you're a good match.
Well, thanks, Keith. Well, we just couldn't think of any better way to start off 2016 than to pay tribute to someone who was a friend, a colleague, more to all of us here today, and to many of you that have been viewing Hello, It's Us over the years, and that, of course, is Terry Cunningham. Terry passed on in March, as I'm sure many of you know, and I can tell you that as a colleague of Terry's at the Center for Disabilities and Development, where I work as a program coordinator, this was something that was near and dear to his heart. I can also tell you that as someone who has had a chance to review some of the archives of the show, it's been a pleasure for me to see how much Terry put into making this the very best program that it could be. But enough for me for right now. What I would like to do is to introduce some people that have known Terry, worked with him for a long time. We have in studio with us today Tom Gilsenan, the manager of Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop. Hi, Tom. We have Bob Bacon, who worked with Terry, supervised him, and more than anything else, I think, was a great friend to Terry. Mm-hmm. Bob.
Hi, Mike.
And we have Starla Elsberry, Terry's longtime partner and soulmate. And Starla drove in from quite a distance here today, so thank you, Starla, for taking the time to come.
It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
What we'd like to do is to begin we'll just have a nice conversation about Terry. We have some topics that we'll kind of take a look at, but in true Terry style, we wouldn't want to have anything too scripted. Because we want the people's personality to really come out. That's something that I really learned from Terry. I'll just share a couple thoughts about him from my own personal perspective. I really learned a lot from him about what it meant to mobilize people around a cause. When he believed in something, he would call you, he would talk to you about it, he would educate you, and whoever would listen. He was a great sports fan like I am. He enjoyed all kinds of art activities here in Iowa City. He was always going to go to a concert or something. He had a great gift for hospitality as well. I live out of town and sometimes have to stay in Iowa City for late night meetings. And Terry was just great at saying, "Oh, I've always got a bed here. Come on over and we'll have supper." And just had some great discussions where I really got to know Terry a lot. So I think above and beyond everything else, he was just a great friend who had a lot of knowledge about the issues that people with disabilities face, and was passionate enough to really get out there and do something about them. What I'd like to do now, and Keith, you and I can just kind of, we'll take turns here, or just as the spirit moves, we'll move on to Tom. Tom, I know that you were really fortunate to work with Terry in a number of capacities. I'd like to just ask you to share how you kind of came to know Terry and some of the ways that you partnered over the years.
Well, Terry came to the to Uptown Bill's for events first of various kinds, concerts and things like that, and ultimately became the president of the board of Uptown Bills, and was our leader for I think 2.5 years. And it was during that time that there was lots of change going on, and he was a good, sturdy soul to have leading us through that. He also was a participant with Combined Efforts Theater, which holds most of the rehearsals for its shows at the coffee house. And it wasn't too long before he had found his way into the shows and was on stage himself in a variety of roles. And then also he was forever experimenting with getting around town on with his wheelchair. And he was particularly interested in the path along the highway there from Paul's heading out towards Mormon Trek. And he would report on how it was going. When it was almost done, that was fine, except that on Orchard, which was the last street, the last section, suddenly Orchard was torn up. So we had it was a challenge there. But and then we talked many times about how to get over Highway 1 or Highway 6, or how to cross the river. What were the different strategies? And we would discuss it. Me on a bicycle, and he with his chair, and what were the different kinds of obstacles we faced. So we had a great time, and lots of jokes talking about the things we ran into along the way, whether it was other people or animals or trees that had fallen down, or the latest kind of construction.
You know, it's interesting to me because there are all these fancy words going on around peer support and so forth. And when I think about Terry, you know, he seemed to know how to find something in common with whoever he interacted with, and I can just hear the two of you swapping those stories. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the collaboration with Uptown Bills, and I know that some of the shows that Keith, that you and Terry did were actually done from Uptown Bills.
Yeah.
I wonder how that happened.
That's right. That's right. I think the first one was when Keith and Terry first teamed up with the new show, new title,
Yeah.
Hello, It's Us. And I think that was 4 years ago now, right?
That was about 4 years ago.
And we, at that point, we didn't have the really nice ramp leading up to our stage we have now. So Keith and Terry broadcast from in front of the stage, and they positioned me in between them. And then Terry kept worrying about the ramp we did have, and finally went out and found one that was a sturdier ramp. And the first night we had it out to use, the person, a comedian who uses a wheelchair, it was from Marshalltown, said, "Oh, I don't use those." And he just sort of leapt up onto the stage. He would kind of somehow raise his wheelchair and jump onto the stage. So we were disappointed, because here was our first chance to try it out for somebody who we didn't know, you know, to see how it worked for someone who wasn't really familiar with our place. And he said, "No, I don't use those." But it's been, I think that was the first show. And then we had a number of different shows.
Yeah.
One, they went through the whole afternoon, Saturday afternoon programming. Terry and Keith and they came for the Irish session. And they made the Irish session forms in a half circle around the stage, and they made them turn their half circle the other way so they could be filmed. And then they did this, I think, with the ukulele group, and also with the folk singing, community folk singing. So a number of different kinds of shows were broadcast from the coffee house.
Well, we really hope to, for those viewers out there, you want to know that I've had a conversation with Tom already prior to the show, and he's expressed an interest in continuing to collaborate, and we're very, very grateful for that, because it's
love to have you.
It's so much in the spirit. Your work and our work are synergistic for sure. So
love to have you back. Upstairs it is, for viewers who don't know. PATV is right below Uptown Bill's coffee shop, and in fact I have to scurry off back up there right now. So thank you for having me. Best wishes to all of you, and happy holidays to you and to the viewers.
And thank you for coming, Tom. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you on a show in the very near future. So.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we'll jump over to Bob and talk to Bob a little bit now about his work and connection with Terry. So would you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you got to know Terry?
Sure, Mike. As you said, we were really good friends, but we first got to know each other because he eventually joined the Center for Disabilities and Development. But before that, I met him in 2002 when he was chair of Iowa's Olmsted Consumer Task Force. Now, many of you watching the show know what Olmsted is, but in case some of you don't, Terry would want me to be sure to clarify what it was, so I'll do that briefly. Olmsted was a Supreme Court decision handed down in 1999 by the U.S. Supreme Court, which has been a major milestone in terms of disability rights and inclusion of people with disabilities in society. It ruled that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was discrimination if a state administered its service system in such a way that people with disabilities didn't have a choice about living in the community. And so that was a cause that most definitely resonated with Terry. And he found his way onto the task force, and then his peers elected him as the chair. When I went to the first Olmsted task force meeting I attended, I was amazed at how articulate he was. His grasp of the issues, and in hindsight now, I can say that I think he had a really powerful sense of what Olmsted could mean for the state of Iowa.
And we're seeing some of that fruit as we think about the 500 people who have now come out of congregate
Yes.
facilities, and Terry, that just didn't happen. And Terry, since I've known him, I knew Terry back in the mid '90s when we were doing work with independent living, is when I first met him. In fact, back that far, he had this vision that people shouldn't be living in places they didn't want to live.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I wound up talking with him after a time about would he like to join the Center for Disabilities and Development. And I'm not sure, maybe Starla, you know, how much he had to think about that. But of course, he eventually decided to be part of our staff. That meant that he would have to give up his role as chair of the Olmsted Task Force. So I think he thought long and hard about that. But when he also thought about all of the work that needed to be done to help Iowa comply with the Olmsted decision, and when he saw the role that the Center for Disabilities and Development could play in collaboration with other partners like the Department of Human Services and other state agencies, people with disabilities, family members, advocates. I think he thought that CDD would be a good spot for him, and so he joined.
It was definitely his dream job, as he referred to it. So,
Yeah. Now, at that time, the Department of Human Services had subcontracted to the Center for Disabilities and Development a grant called the Real Choices Systems Change Grant. Real Choices goes back to Olmsted, and remember what I was saying about Olmsted means people need to have a real choice about living in the community. And one of Terry's tasks became eventually staffing the task force that he used to be the chair of. That meant helping task force members understand particular policy issues, helping to draft position statements, and so forth.
So yeah, I'm sure that had to be real gratifying for him, doing that and knowing that he was making a difference, just in a bit of a different way, but taking the knowledge that he had acquired and passing it along to others, which is such an important part of what we do and what Terry was about.
Yeah, absolutely. And he worked for us for, full-time until he experienced some health challenges, and that made it not possible for him to continue in quite the same role, but he wound up working for us on a part-time basis with a telecommuting agreement. He worked from his home. And you know, with technology, it's amazing what can happen.
Absolutely.
And actually, then and that's when he actually became involved with Hello, It's Us, and that became a primary part of his what he did for CDD.
Thank goodness he did that. I guess one of the things that that makes it even more personal, and maybe as we go, we can all just jump in on this, but the question, Bob, just in terms of, you know, you had a neat relationship because you also were friends with Terry, and that's you know, that was an easy thing to do. Do you have anybody, and I'll just toss this out to anybody, would anybody like to share a kind of a fun story, or just something that you know you think about in terms of what you really treasure, some time that you were able to spend with Terry?
Well, my time with Terry was a learning experience too, because even though we're looking at the disability side of things, Terry had the amazing ability to be able to communicate one-on-one with non-disabled people. And I really admired that, because here's a man that was not disabled, then becoming disabled. And that's resounding.
Yeah, that's an important piece.
Yeah, I actually met Terry in 1970 before his car accident and before he became a quadriplegic. And he had that gift then, even at 17 years old. I mean, he was able to engage with people of all abilities and backgrounds. He was warm, he was friendly, and people really gravitated towards him for that reason.
I'm sure.
So,
Yeah, you mentioned how you had sports in common with Terry. So did I. He took a lot of pride about having a share of the Green Bay Packers, right?
Yeah. Forgot about that.
Yeah, and let's see. Another thing that he and I think probably you and probably Keith too would bond with Terry over was his love of beer.
Absolutely.
He liked to try beers, and he would recommend, and I myself have a hard time deciding whether I like hoppy beers or dark beers, and with Terry, he could have recommendations on both sides, but he preferred, I think, the darker beers, and yep, and actually in terms of when he finally did need to move to the nursing home, and you know, to say Terry and nursing home in the same sentence is difficult. I mean, there is certainly a role for nursing homes in society, but there's also, I mean, we should be about supporting people in the community for as long as we possibly can. But I was drafted every now and then to bring beer into the nursing home, which was something that I did.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, one of and Terry, you know, even in his days when he could no longer drink beer because of some health issues, whenever I would stay with him, okay, I got the IPAs out in the fridge, so it was one final thing, sort of a work thing, but I mean, I guess all of these things transcend both work and just our personal lives. But one of Terry left us many legacies, and the one that I'm fortunate to have is to have assumed the opportunity to co-host Hello, It's Us with Keith. But I know that one of the things that Terry also did was, in his last few months, wrote an article for a newsletter called Impact,
Right.
the 25th edition. Bob, could you talk to us just a little bit about that?
Sure, that's what I have on my lap here. Actually, Impact is a newsletter that's produced by the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Minnesota. And they wanted to do a special issue on the 25th anniversary of the ADA, which was last July. And because Senator Harkin had played such a powerful role in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, they wanted 3 Iowans to appear in this article that I was to put together. So it was a no-brainer that Senator Harkin should contribute something, and he did. Representative Dave Heaton, Republican House member and tremendous disability champion in the Iowa House, also contributed. And Terry contributed his perspective. He had been, for a while, a member of the Regional Advisory Council for the new Mental Health and Disability Services region in our area here.
Yeah. I think,
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bob. I think one of my favorite moments with Terry was at ADA celebration about 3 years ago. I called them up from the audience, and that little did we know, that was the starting point of co-anchoring the show,
Yeah,
because we fell right into it.
you sure did. I'll never forget that. You just riffed off one another, asked each other questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost like, and it wasn't scripted. It was
No.
just real.
Yeah.
Came right from your heart and soul.
That's
Yeah.
what I like about Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry believed, in terms of this article, in terms of what he said, he believed that the ADA had been responsible for a lot of progress in terms of physical accessibility, to some degree in terms of transportation, but he made a pitch in this article for the next push being in employment. It's still the case that people with disabilities who have so much to contribute to the workforce are underemployed and too often unemployed. And he believed that a great deal could be done to improve that. Maybe later in 2016 you all will have a show on employment, because
Absolutely.
so much progress is being made now. Policy is changing, funding is changing, and it with the passage of the federal law, the Workforce Innovation and WIOA, Workforce Opportunities and Innovation Act, it's a sea change in terms of expectations of people with disabilities working.
Well, I think Terry, just by his working at a time when he could have easily said, I'm done. I don't have to work, or I can't work. He worked up until nearly the end, and I mean that's I think that's a personal testimony to what he believed about employment. And well, Starla, you've been awfully quiet over there.
Well,
and we want to hear some stories from you about Terry.
About Terry?
Yep, we sure do. And
well, I've probably known him longer than any of you. Like I said, we first met at age 17 when we were working together the summer between our junior and senior year. He was supervisor of a playground summer program for children and young adults that had disabilities in Marshalltown. And I was the president of our youth art chapter in Marshall County. And one thing that the program that Terry worked for did every year was take the group to Blank Park Zoo in Des Moines. And so he said, we can't do this without some help. And so my group, I recruited some help. And so we loaded up the school bus and went to Des Moines. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And Terry was tall and lanky and shaggy haired and very good looking. And, I was a 17-year-old teenage girl. So, I appreciated him very much at that point. But all the campers just adored him. They clamored to sit by him or hold his hand or look at me, Terry, and so forth. So he really did a great job. But I have some stories that Terry shared. He has a really good lifelong friend, Ken Kersey, who now lives out in Beaverton, Oregon. But he and Ken used to get up to all kinds of mischief as young boys. And one of the things that they prided themselves on every year was sneaking into the Marshall County Fairgrounds without paying, just so they could get in and see what was going on. That was always a good story. And then he also told a story about when they were teenagers, and I think they were still underage. But anyway, they went into a bar strip club in Marshalltown and ordered beer and sat down. And as they were sitting there, in walked Ken's father, Augie, and they thought, boy, we're in trouble. And the other thing was Terry's dad was an Iowa Highway Patrol officer at that time.
Yeah.
So they thought they were busted. But Augie sat down, ordered a beer, talked with him for a little bit, and then got up and left. That's so typical of Terry. I mean, he enjoyed pulling off things that he really shouldn't have done. But, he just has a lot of great stories about his family. He was the oldest of 8 kids, and there were a lot of tales to tell, particularly on his younger brother, Todd. And he often regaled people with those stories too. So he just had such a good sense of humor, and was just so much fun to be with and around, and really enjoyed the time I spent with him.
You commented. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Well, you had just commented in the eulogy about his ability to bring everybody together, and as that was one of his contributions. And you've talked a little bit about that already. But are there some other contributions that you'd like to share as we start to wind down a little bit on?
He really had an affinity for people who were struggling, and he. One of the ways that he connected with me was during the time that I was going through a divorce. He had also been married and divorced, and so, he was one of my friends that really kept in touch. I mean, he called, he checked in regularly, how are you doing? And he did that with other people too that were going through other issues, but it really meant a lot to all of us that he was so caring. The other thing is, even when he lived in Marshalltown, he was very active in the community, and he was involved with his church, St. Mary's, serving on their parish council there. He was really passionate about the Marshalltown Park and Recreation program, and he served on their advisory board and really worked to bring in, the softball games and so on, every summer. And then he also served on the Human Rights Commission in Marshall County, and he just really cared about the welfare of people.
He embodied life to the fullest in
Absolutely.
issues with and without disabilities. I'm getting the high sign here,
Yeah.
believe it or not, already. And so, Keith, would you like to close this out here?
I think 30 minutes is not enough time to talk about a person like Terry.
That's
Right.
good.
Yeah.
We have to go now. But I would like the audience out there to realize that the issue we talked about today doesn't only affect people with disabilities. It affects everyone. Thank you. Good night out there.